It is 5:30, and we want to keep this on a very good time schedule. So we are going to ask you to go ahead and find a seat if you have not yet. Find a place to sit, and we'll call our guest of honor here up to the podium. Want to tell you we are videotaping this Q&A for use on the Ann Harder Show podcast. So, and we want you to interact with questions. Rebecca, where did she go? She's right back there. She has a microphone, so my request is that you would please ask your question into the mic so we could all hear it. Anyway, at this point, it is a privilege for me to be able to introduce to you Eric Metaxas, #1 New York Times best-selling author, speaker, and host of the Eric Metaxas Show. You know from his wonderful books, Bonhoeffer, Amazing Grace, Letter to the American Church. But more than that, many of us felt his heart in public mourning this past month when he traveled to the Charlie Kirk Memorial Service. And your podcast right after you got back from Arizona was, for me, it was just profound. Your observations of these events that have happened. So warm welcome for Eric Metaxas.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, let's start. Let's talk about Charlie Kirk and what aspects of his life do you believe are most important for people to remember that they might be overlooked in kind of the noise of other things that are happening?
Well, I think I find it really in bad taste that some of the conversations that people are having right now. I'm not going to mention Candace Owens by name, but there are people that don't seem to have. It's almost like they're bad manners. Somebody was just murdered, and they want to talk about all kinds of stuff, and I just find it in bad taste. What I've been saying about it, it was so devastating that every one of us, if you knew him at all, it just, you reel. It's incomprehensible, you know. And the reason it's incomprehensible, I think, for most of us, is especially if you're a Christian. You say, Lord, how could you let this happen? I mean, if it's some random person, you say, well, stuff happens. But when it's somebody who's being so effective for God's purposes, it really does rock you. And you say, Lord, I don't get it, you know. And it's good that you don't get it. You shouldn't get it. It's a horror. But what I have been saying is that God is sovereign. And when you realize that really tests your faith. What kind of God do you believe in? Because if you really know the Lord, you will praise him in all circumstances, even when something horrible happens like that. And I believe that the Lord is going to use this. It's already triggering revival in the country. And I'll say a word about that later tonight. But I think there's just no question that God is using it to radicalize people that maybe they were sitting on the fence. Well, maybe this finally shoved them off the fence. That's my hope.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned rhetoric. What are there specific sources of rhetoric, be it social media or political commentary, that you think are uniquely dangerous, really, right now?
Not really. I think human beings are the same as we've always been, which is not that great. And so we will use whatever tools you give us to do harm, or, you know, we can do good, but it just makes it possible, you know, to talk about stuff. But I always wonder too, like, do people have nothing better to do? Like, maybe you need to have more kids, or, you know, or do something to keep you busy so that you don't have time to go down these rabbit holes. Because I think people really waste a lot of time and are not aware that they're wasting it.
But it seems like the inflammatory speech is just accelerating, if nothing else, just in the last couple of days. What's the proper balance between holding people accountable for what they're saying and protecting free speech?
Well, I think, you know, it's kind of funny because I wrote a book, I don't know if they have copies out there, called If You Can Keep It. And in my book, If You Can Keep It, I was myself realizing how little I understand about American civics and how stuff works. Like when people throw terms around like censorship or free speech or whatever, do you really know what that means? You know, we ought to know what that means. So if Jimmy Kimmel says something unpleasant, it's not a lack of free speech if he gets kicked off his show. Nobody owes you a show on ABC, right? Does anybody here have a show on ABC? No. So we have to understand what is free speech, and people kind of throw that term around and say, oh, you're being censored or whatever. And I think that we have to understand how that works. Like, what is the law? And free speech fundamentally means that you're in a free country, so there's no such thing as hate speech. Don't let anybody ever talk to you about hate speech or a hate crime. If I murder you, I should be prosecuted for murdering you, not for the reason that I murdered you. The reason is not relevant. I murdered you because you're black. I murdered you because you're white. I murdered you because you're Christian. I murdered you because you're Muslim. I murdered you because I didn't like you. It makes no difference. Murder is the crime. So there's no hate crime. And that's like thought crime. And it's the same thing with speech. There's speech, and there's some speech you don't like. Now, we know, if you really are a student of this stuff, you know there are limits to free speech. In other words, you cannot, the famous one, you cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. That's what the Supreme Court said that, because that's not free speech, because people's lives will be endangered if you do that. But short of that kind of stuff, we have the ability, we have the freedom to say what we like, and it doesn't need to be right. You have the freedom to say stupid things, you have the freedom to say wrong things. People have died for that freedom. And that's actually very important to think about, that people have died so that we have free speech, so we don't have to worry about if I say something, will the government come after me? Now, the government has no business coming after you, but in the marketplace of ideas, if I say something on the job, of course I could get fired for that, so we need to have wisdom. But that's got nothing to do with free speech. You're on the job, somebody's paying you. And I think a lot of times we think about this stuff stupidly or sloppily, and we really need to understand that. In a community, if you say something idiotic, you may lose friends. That's the price. But the question of whether you have that freedom, you do have that freedom. So the question is how you use the freedom. But we have it, and I don't think we need to worry too much about policing it. I think that you have to, in a free society, you have to put up with the bad stuff. That's the price of freedom. Now, again, that could be a bigger conversation, but in terms of speech, you have to, going way back to, the 17th century, John Milton wrote this famous treatise, Areopagitica, about this issue, because the government was trying to clamp down on speech. And he said, no, if you have people saying stuff you don't like, then you can counter it with more speech. And you have to trust that people can tell the difference between what's right and wrong, what's true and false. So I wasn't expected to be asked such complex questions. This is very difficult. I was expecting some dumb softballs. So
okay, here's another.
And I'm
one.
hoping for a few of those before it's over.
What role then do you see for private citizens, churches, and faith communities to play in healing after what happened last month?
I don't know that there needs to be much healing. Unless you were, I think his wife is the only one really, and his parents. But I think we have to understand, and I keep saying this, we're in a war. And when you're in a war, there are casualties. There's violence in the world, and I think we simply have to understand that. And I think I'm not going to play that game and say that it's on both sides. It's mostly on the left. So even though it's sort of, there's all kinds of people that are guilty of stuff, the left has ginned up the rhetoric so dramatically that if you are a conservative, you're Hitler. And that's preposterous. It reveals the ignorance of those folks, because if you understand what actual fascism is, you don't call Donald Trump or the pastor that said something you don't like a fascist. That's just ridiculous. But I think the left has run out of, and this is kind of gets to the murder of Charlie. If you're losing the argument and you don't want to lose the argument, you say, well, I've got to silence the person that has embarrassed me. Instead of repenting and saying, you know what, I got it wrong, you're right, I got to rethink it, you want to silence the other person. So you call them a name. And that's what I think the left has done increasingly, because they tend not, the secular left, do not have arguments. The idea that a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man, everyone knows that's idiotic. Everyone knows that's idiotic. So what do? They basically say, well, if you say anything about it, I'm going to call you names and I'm going to make you pay a price. But they're not using arguments. They're just bullying you in a sense. And so we're living in that time where I think the left has become very angry, because over time they have looked increasingly foolish, and over time you lose the arguments, and you can't. And I think that frustration has led them to use, dramatic, hyperbolic language, and that frankly led to the attempted assassination of the president, led to the murder of Charlie, because there are always going to be crazy people who, if they hear something often enough, they will act on it. So that's another story.
Was there a particular turning point, to use a phrase, when you knew God was calling you to use your voice publicly on cultural issues?
Well, I got saved in 1988, and I really didn't know what the Lord was going to do with me. I was just asking Him to lead me and guide me, and I wanted to bring people to faith. But it wasn't really until I wrote the Bonhoeffer book that I began realizing how important ideas are and how important the faith is and how important it is that we live out our faith. But it was really, in 2016, I had a radio show. I had first just become, kind of a public figure because I had a radio show. And so I came out for, the Republican candidate, Donald Trump. And the blowback I got was so astonishing to me from Christians and conservatives. And I thought, what a weird world we live in. What is going on? And that was like the first blush of kind of what we're talking about, where if you didn't agree with people, they would demonize you. They would call you names. And I thought, if you're saying that about Trump voters, you're talking about my mother and father. And I will not tolerate that. And my mother and father represent folks like you and other just godly, decent people who were suddenly being demonized by the mainstream press and by the cultural elites. And I really took issue with that. I thought, this is unacceptable in America. And so that's the first time that I kind of began to push back, because I thought, this is unacceptable, that people are being demonized and they're not really, they can't fight back. They don't have a voice. So I had a voice, and I said, I have to try to talk about it. So it really was around 2016 when I found myself being shoved into doing this. It wasn't like I chose this or liked it or like it now. It's just kind of, I felt God's kind of pushing me into it.
Is there anything you would tell that younger self today that you've learned?
Well, I wish I had been bolder much earlier. There's nothing I can do about that, but I really do think that I was under the spell, which some people still are, Christians in particular, that, I don't have to talk about anything divisive, or we somehow, and I just think that's an illusion. I think that you want to be kind and gracious to the extent you can be, but at some point, if you care about the unborn, or if you care about any number of things, there are people that are going to try to shut you down, or be nasty, or whatever. And I was laboring under the illusion that maybe that wasn't the case, but I found out that it was the case.
Do you have a favorite book? You're a prolific writer, wildly successful. I know it's like your favorite child. Pick your favorite child.
Yeah. It's like Sophie's Choice. I do not really have a favorite book. No, I don't. I mean, I have a number of them. I mean, it all depends what mood you're in. You know what I'm saying? There's sometimes I think my book Fish Out of Water, which tells the story of my growing up, there's a lot of humor in it, and I enjoy it just because there's so much crazy stuff. I put in all these crazy stories that are all true. So in some ways that makes me smile, because I actually remember those things that I'm writing about. I think my book Amazing Grace, which is about Wilberforce, most people don't know about that, but I'm fond of that, and I think it's as important a story as the Luther story or the Bonhoeffer story, and especially when you're talking to people in the pro-life movement, it's a real story of somebody who fought and won by God's grace. So it's a very inspiring story. So I'm definitely fond of that. I had to reread it last summer because we did a cruise with 300 listeners on my radio show around the Greek islands, and I had to speak 6 times, I guess. And so I spoke on some of the books that I haven't spoken on in years. So I had to reread my own book, and it was kind of a weird experience. But anyway, yeah.
Well, and so that begs the question, have any of these amazing figures that you've written about, have they shaped your faith in some way?
There's no question about it. I mean, Wilberforce and Bonhoeffer in particular, there's just no way, and it's kind of, I didn't know when I was writing these biographies what the point was. I just thought I'm writing a biography, and then you realize that these stories touch people's lives, and you cannot get, I realized really that God speaks through people and through people's lives, and so the people around us affect us. So it's not like we read a series of bullet points. People's lives are what communicate most powerfully. And so if it's not somebody that you know personally, reading a book about somebody's life can really affect you. And it can't help but affect you. If you're the writer of it, it affects you 10 times more. So writing about Bonhoeffer and Wilberforce definitely changed me somehow. No question, yeah.
So what's next? What are you working on now?
I'm working on a gigantic book. I was working on it today about the American Revolution to come out next year for the 250th, the Super Centennial, and I'm excited about it. Maybe I'll mention it in my remarks tonight, but I'm very excited about it because I think the story of America, first of all, it is inescapably a Christian story, and we live in a secular culture that has pretty much brushed that away. It is absolutely inescapable that America would have never come into existence if not for preachers in pulpits preaching about liberty and the link between faith and liberty. And it really is so inescapable that it's amazing that we live in a culture where most people don't know this stuff. So it's not like the point of my book is to tell that, but in the course of telling the story of the revolution, you can't help but tell that. So I'm excited for that book.
Of course, Letter to the American Church was so founded on your research on Bonhoeffer and what was happening in Germany in the 1930s. What do you want us to take away from this? I told you probably, I said, he stopped preaching and started meddling with me. He was not familiar with that
I was not
expression.
familiar with that Texas expression until tonight.
But I just felt like you were writing it to me. You started meddling because I felt like it was such an encouragement to stop worrying about offending somebody. Start just being truthful about what you believe. It's based on Scripture. What have you to fear?
Well, I should say I have never, ever had the feeling that I had when I wrote this book that the Lord himself led me to write this message. I mean, everything I do, I hope the Lord is leading me and guiding me. In fact, I know he is, but I never, ever felt what I felt with this book. This book, I had a burning desire to tell this that I knew was the Lord. Like I felt like the Lord's given me an assignment, and I can't really explain it, but it was very palpable that this was the Lord's message, and he wanted to get this message out. And I was going to self-publish it. I wasn't even going to find a publisher. I thought I've got to get this done, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just for some pastors out there. I don't know who, but it really. I think I can say that the Holy Spirit led me to write what I wrote in that book, and that it's the Holy Spirit that's meddling with you, not me.
I agree. No,
No, I know.
I definitely.
Let's
know
hope
that
so,
part.
right? Let's hope so. Yeah.
I know that is true. Because the question is there a misconception people have about Christians engaging in public discourse and in politics, if you will, in being more bold, like Charlie Kirk?
Yeah. Oh, no, there's definitely a misconception, and I was laboring under that misconception myself. It's a lie. It's a lie. And where does bad theology come from? Here's the bad news. Where does bad theology come from? It comes from the pit of hell. Yeah. So you can be serving Satan with your religious ideas. But what is worse than that? Nothing. And so when I realized this, that we in America were guilty of the same thing that the Germans were guilty. It's so easy for us to go, oh, the Germans. We're guilty of the same. We're no different than they are, and things just have to line in such a way to make it convenient for you to do this, make it inconvenient to do that, and that's what happened in this country. And so we were moving in a certain direction, and I realized that the American church is 100% guilty because we're the ones that say, oh, I believe Jesus defeated death on the cross, and I believe. Well, if you do, then you have to act like it. and I realized, but it was about 4 years ago, I guess, that wow, we have really allowed evil to come into this country, no different than the Germans allowed it. And if we do not step up, we will continue, and it will, things can get much worse. People think, oh, how bad can it get? It can get very bad. And the Lord in his grace, I think, gave us a taste of it to wake us up.
Mm-hmm. What do you hope your legacy will be?
I'm not old enough to think about that. But thank you for thinking that I am.
Are there projects or passions you haven't pursued yet?
Oh, yeah, many. Many. For years, we've been working on creating a late night show, kind of like, whether Johnny Carson, Dick Cavett, or something like that. And I think next year, I'm pretty sure it'll come out next year. My radio show was just canceled. It's kind of a strange thing. Salem Media is going through a weird time. They had to end some programs, and so I'm going to be doing my own podcast. But I think the late night show, the TV thing, is really, God has put that on my heart for years and years, and I do believe that that's how the Lord's going to use me. But we'll see.
Well, you say your superpower is getting amazing guests to come and be on your podcast, which is true.
Yes.
I've loved every one.
Well, it's funny. If you live long enough, you meet all these interesting people, and you think, I want to interview this one and that one. And I do something, I didn't mention it, called Socrates in the City, which we've been doing for 25 years. And we have our gala in New York City on December 2nd, Christmas gala. And it has been a delight to interview people there. And that we're doing more and more and more with that. My daughter, who's 26, she's running it really, really, really beautifully. And we're just doing a lot more of that. So I'm very excited about continuing that too. It's kind of about the life of the mind. And it's a way to bring people in who maybe aren't believers, or they're not sure what they think, and you want to kind of help them think more deeply about the big questions, because we believe if you think deeply about the big questions, guess what? We've got some answers, like God has some answers, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an awesome idea. That's fabulous. Well, let's open it up to some questions. Rebecca is running around. Please raise your hand so you can speak into the microphone. Not everybody at once. Anybody have a question for her?
They don't have to be questions like the ones I was just asked, which are way too substantive. Just any dumb questions, like my favorite ice cream or something like that.
Okay, what is it?
Yeah, I don't have one. Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of people are recognizing amongst young people there's a revival that's happening in our country. And one of the other things that's happening amongst young people, we're seeing a lot of young people very interested in church that has liturgy, high church that really honors God. From your background...
You're saying my interdenominational church doesn't honor God?
You come from a Greek Orthodox background, and so do you see young people, finding Jesus through the high church?
I couldn't care less how people find Jesus, but I'll tell you, I think you're right. I think that people are hungry for structure. It's no different than saying, suddenly young people are thinking, hey, maybe I should get married. Yes, God has given us forms, he's given us things and ways to do things. And I think that we have been drifting, roughly since the 60s, so dramatically in the direction of formlessness and chaos and whatever, that eventually you get hungry for a little liturgy, or a little format, or a little formality, or a little ritual. We all know how ritual can go wrong. Ritual for its own sake, liturgy for its own sake, it's dead. But when it's right, it's beautiful. And so I think that there has been, just as the culture has drifted away from that more and more people are saying, yes, I think I'd like that. So, but yeah, I'm just generally encouraged in all directions.
Another question. Just pop up your hand.
I'll take true or false questions if that makes it easier.
Definitely not a true or false, but over the last few decades, one could probably make an argument that the left has made headway in the culture war, leveraging education as a means to bring about their agenda.
Yeah.
What would you say should be the Christian, counter to that
Homeschooling.
in an educational context?
Mostly homeschooling or classical Christian schools. Homeschooling, I meet homeschoolers all over the country. They are the sharpest, most mature, amazing young people. And let me tell you, the world's not ready for it. They don't even know they exist. And their minds are going to be blown because they're going to take over the world. I mean, the education they're getting, most homeschool kids, is so much better than anything you could get, certainly in a public school. So that to me is number one. The left has done a march, the proverbial march through the institutions, and we're dealing with it. And by the grace of God, it got so bad that a lot of people woke up. That's the good news, is that a lot of people finally woke up and said, oh, you know what? I think I better vote. I think I better do this. I think I better do that, because if I don't, we're going off a cliff. But I'm very encouraged. I finally met Linda McMahon, a month or so ago, and I thought, what a delightful thing that we have a president of the United States who wants to abolish the Department of Education. That is like the greatest thing ever. And I could think about 12 more departments that I'm praying, because we all have lived in an era of bloated federal government. What happened? I mean, imagine if George Washington or John Adams or Jefferson could see our bloated federal government. It's astonishing, drifting away from what we're supposed to be. Writing this book on the revolution, I see it. I just see that you cannot have freedom if you have a bloated federal government. It just becomes, by definition, it will become corrupt. And so I'm just grateful that we're seeing that many people are finally waking up to that, and we have an administration willing to deal with it.
So that was the kinder through 12th grade, approach. So homeschooling from a Christian perspective and worldview, a comprehensive Christian classical education.
Yeah.
What would you say to the post-secondary option?
Don't go.
Okay.
College is mostly a waste. I mean, Charlie Kirk wrote a book about it, and Charlie Kirk, he didn't go to college, and he didn't amount to anything, did he? I'm just telling you, like, college, because I went to Yale University, I can tell you, it is a scam, pretty much. I mean, it's either a scam or propaganda factories, and you don't know. Now, parents naively, lovingly send their kids hoping for something, and unless it's like a STEM thing or whatever, but there was a time, in our history when it made some sense, but most colleges have really become something. This doesn't mean I would say nobody should go to college, but I would think 2 and 3 and 4 times before I would spend money to get a degree, which you probably won't use. Again, if you're talking about, well, you want to be a doctor, or you want to be a lawyer, that's different. That's there. You actually clearly have to go, and you have to. That makes sense. But a lot of people are wasting their money or their parents' money, and even worse than wasting money, wasting time, and even worse than wasting time, taking in pernicious ideas that can ruin you for your life, or that can ruin you for a long time. And it's only by God's grace that I came out of the death spiral, because it really is, most colleges, and certainly elite colleges, have drifted so far from what any parent would really want their kids to get there. But we just don't know about it. And part of the problem we have in the culture, too, is that as things grow, you start saying, like, oh, we'll give it to the experts. Like, the experts know how to do education. And you realize that's never true. The experts don't know anything. The experts know less than your average person, that they're often out of touch. And so that assumption that the experts in education, they've got it covered, the experts are probably, culturally Marxist lunatics. And you don't want your kids near them. And so I think... Again, I think people are waking up to it. Listen, Harvard University, the president of Harvard University was ousted for a plagiarism scandal. Now think about this. Harvard University, it's not like, students were caught cheating. The president of Harvard is a plagiarist. And you think, what does that say about the whole of academia? Can you imagine the culture of academia where you can become not just promoted, but the president of Harvard, and you haven't done the work, and you don't, and so I think that the standards have just changed so dramatically that all of those institutions that, you think you know what they are, but they're not. They're not. I wouldn't dream of sending a kid to one of those places today. And most of them were very bad in the 80s when I was there, but it's just gotten worse. So I think we're in a good place because I think people are waking up to it.
We have time for one more.
Eric, talking about theology here, what are the biggest challenges even within the American pulpit that we're seeing today with bad theology and then bad ecclesiology and all that? But what are the issues that we're seeing within the American church, within the pulpit, that are our biggest challenges?
That's another big question. Don't you have any dumb question you want to lead off with? Some stupid kind of question? No, that's such a huge question that I can barely answer it. I think part of why I wrote Letter to the American Church, and the sequel to it is Religionless Christianity, which is just more the same. But I think a lot of times, and this is human beings, we're thoughtless. We kind of drift along thinking we kind of know what's going on, but we haven't really thought it through, or we assume somebody else thought it through. And I think when a lot of people think of church, they have some ideas about what a church is or what it's supposed to be. And I think it's a scary thing to say, is that Jesus' idea of church? And most of us don't want to take the trouble to think about it because it might mess us up. But we're supposed to be the church. We're supposed to be, militant in the culture. And I don't mean theocratically militant, but if we really believe what we believe, we could change the world. We should be acting on what we believe. But most people have kind of made peace with things, and they have, I guess the real answer to that is that I think most evangelical Christians in America, and this is what happened in Germany in the 30s, they defined being a Christian theologically. So it's like, well, do you believe this and this and this and this? They go, yep, okay, you're a Christian. And you realize that's not what it is to be a Christian. You have to live out what you believe. Like, I'm not interested in your theology if you're not living it, because if you're not living it really, then you don't actually believe it. So we've kind of redefined things. It's this kind of enlightenment view that, like, it's these intellectual concepts. Do you agree to this and this and this, this? And that's not the biblical view of faith. But we've kind of taken that in, and it's all about salvation. You believe this and this and this, you're saved. Okay, next. We don't think like it's supposed to be a whole lifestyle. I'm supposed to live my faith out in every sphere, radically. Now, again, what does that mean? It doesn't mean we're all supposed to be wild-eyed prophets, but the point is, if it's true, it's going to change everything. And I think somehow we've just bought into this idea that it's just theology, and it's like, you got theology, okay, good, and then the rest of your life is secular, and we're supposed to import it into every part of our life, and it will change everything, and it will change the culture. And so, that's usually what I'll talk about later on, but that's about it. That's about it.
Well, this has been a taste of what we're in for later this evening. A big round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Metaxas. He's got a little more time in here. I know several of you came in later. If you want to get a book, get it signed, have a picture made, there'll be time for that. All right? Thank you again.